The wind in 1877 did not ask permission. It came down from the high mesas, carrying fine red dust that settled on everything, tasting of grit and distance. Kate Whitaker, 22 years old and new arrived from Missouri, tasted that grit on her lips and felt it in the folds of her gray traveling dress. She stood by the back of a freight wagon, watching the teamsters unhitch the mules. The animals steamed in the cooling air, their sweat-streaked hides smelling sharp and earthy. This was Arizona territory, harder and brighter than any place she had ever known. She had come with the wagon train to open a school. In her trunks, she had primers and slates, but she also carried two other things: her mother's leather-bound journal, filled with pressed flowers and hopeful script, and the heavy, cumbersome equipment of a wet plate photographer, the mahogany camera, the brass lens, the heavy tripod, and the dark box tent, along with the fragile glass plates and the sharp-smelling bottles of collodion and silver nitrate. She was a teacher, but she was also a witness, and she meant to capture this place. The man who watched the wagons arrive did so from a kilometer away, hidden in a cleft of sandstone. His name was Ashki Nez. He was perhaps 28 years old, though he measured time in seasons and sorrows, not in calendar pages. He was Dine, a man of the people. He had survived the long walk, the forced march to Bosque Redondo, and he had returned home with a silence that had settled deep in his bones. Now, he protected the livestock camps and the hidden water trails. His rifle was clean, his knife was sharp, and he trusted the evidence of his eyes over the words of any man, especially a white man. He saw the woman with the strange wooden box. He watched her guard it, noted the care with which she directed its placement. She was small, but she did not seem frail. She seemed stubborn. The valley they had entered was not truly a valley, but a canyon, a deep slash in the earth. Canyon de Chelly. The walls were sheer sandstone, glowing a fierce, burned red in the late afternoon sun. Along the canyon floor, a small, brave creek provided life. Cottonwoods, their leaves a shivering green, followed its path, and tucked into terraces and shelves of land were the hogans of his people and the small, miraculous fields of corn. This was the rhythm of the place, the bleat of sheep moving to water, the smell of juniper smoke in the evening, the distant, thin sound of a flute played not for an audience, but for the sky. When the planting season came, there were songs, ceremonies of seeding and hope that were private, ancient, and necessary. They were not meant for the ears of newcomers. But new sounds had begun to intrude. Far to the south, the rumor of the railroad was a steel snake moving west, and closer, in the foothills, Silas Pike had set up a prospecting camp. Pike was a man who had worn a blue cavalry uniform and now wore the fine wool of a capitalist. He was looking for silver, and his survey stakes, small flags of trespass, were creeping closer to the lands of the Dine and the nearby pueblos. Kate saw none of that in her first hours. She saw only the dust, the staggering beauty, and the work ahead. She met Miguel Ortega first. He was a trader, a man of Nuevo Mexico, broad-shouldered with a quick smile and honest eyes. He brokered horses, moving between the worlds of the Dene, the Mexicans, and the Americans with a practiced neutrality. He tipped his hat to her. "Señorita Whitaker, you bring the rain, perhaps?" Kate brushed dust from her sleeve. "I was hoping to bring primers, Mr. Ortega." "Ah," he said, his smile genuine. "Primers are good, but water is life. Remember that here." Later, she met the sheriff. The wagons had barely formed their circle when a rider approached, sitting a tall bay horse with ease. Kate had expected a grizzled man, full of tobacco and bluster. The rider was a woman. Sheriff Alma Price was perhaps 40, lean as a whip, with pale eyes that missed nothing. She wore her badge pinned to a leather vest, over a practical shirt and split skirt. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She was, as Kate would learn, one of the only female sheriffs in the territories, a fact she neither advertised nor apologized for. She had earned the post through pragmatism and a steady hand. "Welcome to the edge of the map, Miss Whitaker," Sheriff Price said, her voice dry as the dust. "Hope you know what you signed up for." "I signed up to teach, Sheriff," Kate said. "You signed up for a fight," Price corrected her, though not unkindly. "A fight over water, a fight over land, and a fight over what this place is going to become." She nodded toward the distant camps. "You have neighbors." The tone of the place was woven from these things. The salt of dried meat and the bitterness of coffee boiled too long. The unspoken laws of the frontier: you did not steal a man's horse. You did not ask about his past. And you always shared water. On her second day, while the men organized the settlement and the women established kitchens, Kate took her camera. She climbed a low ridge, her back aching from the weight of the tripod and the box of glass plates. Ashki Nez watched her go, a flicker of curiosity in his otherwise impassive gaze. He saw her struggle, saw her stop, saw her look. She found what she was looking for at the edge of a small precipice. It was a juniper, an old tree, bent and twisted by a century of wind. It did not grow up. It grew sideways, its branches clinging to the rock, its roots dug deep into invisible cracks. It was not beautiful in the way of Missouri oaks, but it was magnificent. It was a survivor. Kate set up her dark tent, the black cloth hood enveloping her as she coated her first glass plate. The smell of collodion and ether was sharp in the dry air. She worked quickly, the wet plate process demanding speed. She exposed the plate for 8 seconds, counting in her head. 1001, 1002. She captured the tree, the rock, and the vast, empty sky behind it. It would be her symbol, she thought, standing strong in the wind. That evening, the rumor came. It arrived with Miguel Ortega, who had been trading blankets near Pike's camp. He found Sheriff Price supervising the digging of a communal well. "Alma," he said, his voice low, his usual smile gone. "Trouble." Kate was nearby, cleaning her plate, and she could not help but overhear. "Silas Pike is not just prospecting," Miguel said, wiping his neck with a bandana. "He is telling his men he has a new land grant, signed and sealed." Sheriff Price stopped, her hand resting on the pistol at her hip. "A grant for what?" Miguel looked around, at the red walls of the canyon, at the small creek, at the smoke rising from the Dean Hogans. "For all of it," he said. "The whole valley. He says he has the paper to prove the government sold it to him." "That cannot be," Price said. "This is designated territory." "Paper can be made to say anything. Amiga," Miguel said softly, "especially when the signatures are just an X and the compensation is a few bags of flour. He is moving to secure the water." Kate felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the evening air. She looked at her glass plate, the image of the bent juniper still curing. She had come to teach children their letters, and it seemed she had walked into a war that would be fought with ink and lies. The rumor of Silas Pike's land grant settled like a layer of alkali dust, making everyone's temper shorter and their eyes sharper. Kate felt it in the way the settlers now looked toward the canyon walls, not with wonder, but with a new, hard anxiety. Sheriff Price had ridden out to Pike's camp, but had returned 2 days later, her face grim. "He has paper," she told Miguel, her voice low. "He says it is legal, and he has hired guards, a man named Harlan Vex." Kate decided she could not wait for a proper schoolhouse to be built. The children were here, and the need was now. She had supplies, and Miguel Ortega offered the use of a large, sturdy supply shed at the edge of the new settlement. It was dim and smelled of canvas and dried beans, but it was a start. She was transporting her primers and slates, along with her precious camera equipment, on a small buckboard wagon, taking the winding trail up to Chokecherry Pass. The pass was a narrow cut that led to a higher mesa, where several families had begun to stake their claims. Miguel had been meant to go with her, but one of his horses had thrown a shoe, and he was delayed at the forge. "It is only 3 miles, Miss Whitaker," the blacksmith had assured her. "You will be there and back before the noon sun is high." So she went alone, driving the single mule that pulled the buckboard. The air was clear, and the sky was a painful, aching blue. She felt a moment of profound peace. She was doing it. She was here. The peace lasted until she reached the narrowest part of the pass. The first sound was a rifle shot that cracked the air, whining off the rock wall just above her head. The mule brayed in terror and reared. Kate screamed, hauling back on the reins as the wagon skidded. Men on horseback spilled out from the rocks ahead and behind her. They were not Indians. They were white men, hard-faced and wearing the dust of a long ride. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a dark beard and cold, gray eyes, spurred his horse forward. "Get down from the wagon, lady," he ordered. He did not shout. His voice was flat and carried an implicit threat. "What do you want?" Kate's heart was a hammer against her ribs, but her voice was surprisingly steady. "We want what you are carrying for Ortega," the man said. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel. He wore old cavalry trousers, Kate noted, with a worn stripe down the leg. "The maps, and any deeds you are holding." "Maps, I have schoolbooks," Kate said, her hands gripping the wagon rail. "Primers for children." The man, Harlan Vex, though she did not know his name, spat on the ground. "Do not play dumb. We know Ortega is mapping the water routes for the settlers. Hand them over." "I do not have them." One of his men, a younger, nervous-looking boy, pointed. "Harlan, look at that box." He was pointing at her camera crate. Vex's eyes narrowed. "What is in there?" It is a camera," Kate said, moving to stand in front of it. "Glass plates. They are fragile." "Maybe it is maps," Vex said, a cruel amusement in his eyes. He motioned to his men. "Check the wagon. Check all of it." As his men tore through the slates and scattered the primers onto the trail, Kate made a decision. She had her small plate holder in her apron pocket, a single prepared plate she had hoped to use to capture the view from the pass. In the chaos, as Vex turned his back to supervise the search, she did it. Her hands, slick with sweat, fumbled. She pulled the plate, ripped the dark slide out, and held it steady, bracing it against her own body. She pointed it at Harlan Vex. It was not a camera, just the plate holder, but she aimed it like a weapon. She counted 1001, 1002. She slid the dark slide back in. It was a desperate, foolish hope, a snapshot of her attacker, an image captured in pure, terrified instinct. "Nothing here but books, boss," one of the men called. Vex turned back to her, his patience gone. "Tear it open." He pointed to the camera crate. "No," Kate cried, throwing herself in front of it. One of the men shoved her. She fell hard against the wagon wheel, the breath knocked from her lungs. She watched, helpless, as he took the butt of his rifle and smashed the side of the wooden crate. The sound of splintering wood was followed by the devastating, musical chime of breaking glass. Her plates, her images, gone. "It is just glass," the man shouted, disgusted. Vex grabbed her, pulling her to her feet. His face was inches from hers, his breath sour with whiskey and tobacco. "You tell Ortega, he cannot hide the water. This valley belongs to Mr. Pike." He threw her back against the wagon, and that is when a second rifle shot echoed through the pass. Entirely different from the first. It was not a warning shot. It was a statement. The hat flew from Harlan Vex's head. He froze, his hand dropping to his pistol, his eyes scanning the high rocks above them. "Where did that come from?" his nervous man yelled. Another shot, and the rifle in the younger man's hand split, the stock splintering into his grip. He howled, dropping it. On the ridge, silhouetted against the blue, were 3 riders. They were dying. They sat their ponies with an easy, balanced grace, rifles resting in their arms. They were too far away to see clearly, but not too far to miss. "Run," Vex snarled. He did not wait to argue. He vaulted onto his horse, and the entire gang fled, thundering back down the pass, leaving Kate alone with the scattered books and the wreckage of her work. Kate sank to the ground, her knees giving way. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The glass plate holder was still clutched in her hand, digging into her palm. She waited. Minutes passed. Finally, the three riders made their way down the steep incline. The man in the lead dismounted. It was the man she had seen watching the wagons. Ashki Nez. He moved with a fluid silence that was almost unnerving. He was tall, his shoulders broad under a simple cotton shirt. He wore buckskin leggings and soft-soled moccasins. His black hair was tied back in the traditional dine style, and a simple turquoise earring hung from one ear. His face was stark and beautiful, all planes and angles, his eyes dark and unreadable. He stopped 10 feet from her. He did not offer a hand. He simply waited. "Are you harmed?" he asked. His voice was low, and his English was careful, accented but clear. "No," Kate whispered, her voice rough. She cleared her throat and tried again, pushing herself up. "I am not harmed. Thank you. You saved—" He cut her off with a slight motion of his hand. "They wanted the wagon." "They wanted maps," Kate said, finding her footing. She looked at the devastation. Her slates were cracked, her primers scattered in the dust. She knelt by the broken crate, tears of anger and loss welling in her eyes. "And they broke my plates." Ashki looked at the broken glass, then back at her. His gaze was not unkind, but it was assessing. "Glass, it is a strange thing to carry." "It is how I see," she said, picking up a shard. "It is how I remember." "Remembering is not always good," he said, his eyes going distant for a half-second. "You should not be here. This pass is not safe." "I was told it was," Kate said, her anger rising to replace her fear. "I am opening a school. I have a right to be here." Ashki's expression did not change, but a hardness entered his voice. "This land does not care about your rights. It only cares about water. You wish to teach near the sacred spring." It was not a question. "I wish to teach where the children are," she countered. "The children are dying. They have teachers." He gestured to the world around them. "The rock teaches. The wind teaches." "The wind does not teach a child to read," Kate said, standing. She was small beside him, but she did not back down. A flicker of something respect perhaps passed through his dark eyes. He looked at the tracks left by the attackers. "They ride like soldiers." He then looked back at her. "Your school is in the wrong place. You bring them." "I bring books," she said fiercely. "That man, the one who led them, he works for Silas Pike." Ashki Nez went very still. He looked at the broken crate, at the scattered books, and finally at her. He gave a short, sharp nod. "You are the school teacher. You are in danger. I will watch the water trails. That is my work." He turned, swung onto his pony in one fluid motion, and without another word, he and his men rode away, disappearing into the juniper trees as silently as they had arrived. By the time Sheriff Alma Price and Miguel Ortega rode up, Kate had collected her scattered primers and was loading the broken crate back onto the buckboard. Miguel's face was pale with guilt. "Kate, señorita, I am sorry. I should have been here." "It was Harlan Vex," Kate said, her voice flat. Sheriff Price dismounted, kneeling to examine the tracks. "You are sure?" "He said the valley belonged to Mr. Pike." Kate said. She held up the one thing she had saved, the small, wooden plate holder, "And I think I took his picture." Price looked up, her expression a mix of astonishment and grim understanding. "Well, I will be damned." She pointed to the ground. "Ashki Nez was right. Look at this." She pointed to a single, clear boot print in the dust, missed by the fleeing horses. "That is a standard-issue cavalry boot print, worn heel, just like Pike's men used to wear." Miguel finished tying the crate down. He looked at Kate, his eyes full of worry. This was not just a robbery. "Kate, Pike is not a man who likes loose ends. He is trying to erase all other claims. He is erasing the tracks." Kate looked at the supply shed that evening. It was just a wooden box, full of sacks of flour and barrels of nails. But the children had come, drawn by curiosity. A few Dine children, shy and watchful, and the children of the white settlers, rowdy and loud. They gathered at the open door, peering in. Kate took a deep breath, the smell of dust and beans filling her lungs. She picked up a piece of charcoal and a clean pine board. "I am Kate Whitaker," she said, her voice carrying in the quiet evening air. She turned to the board and wrote her name, large and clear. "I am a teacher. This is a school." The children watched, their eyes wide. One small Dine girl crept closer, her finger tracing the shape of the sea in the air. Far up on the ridge, Ashki Nez sat his pony, watching the single lantern glow in the supply shed. He had his own work, protecting the water, the lifeblood of his people. But he knew, with a certainty that settled in his gut, that the small, stubborn white woman in the shed had just become part of it. He was now, against all his instincts, tied to the schoolteacher's story. The single glass plate, tucked safely in its wooden holder, had survived the fall. Kate carried it back to the settlement, guarding it like a live thing, her hands still shaking from the encounter in the pass. She waited until full dark, turning the small supply shed into a fortress of privacy. She hung blankets over the one window, stuffing rags into the cracks of the doorframe. Her chemicals, the ones that had not been in the destroyed crate, were in a smaller, locked box. She worked by the dim ruby light of a photographer's lantern. The air grew thick with the metallic tang of iron developer and the sharp, acetic smell of the fixer. She poured the collodion, a clear, viscous liquid, onto the glass. She dipped it into the silver nitrate bath. Her hands performed the ritual with a steadiness she did not feel. She held her breath as she placed the plate in the developer. The image was a ghost, a whisper, before it began to emerge. First, the dark shapes of the rocks in the pass, then the man, Harlan Vex. He was in motion, turning, his face blurred but recognizable. The cruel set of his mouth, the dark beard, the hat he had been wearing. It was him. Kate felt a thrill of triumph. She had caught him. She moved the plate to the fixer, her heart pounding, and then she saw it. It was not on Vex. It was in the background, on the side of the wagon she had been driving. A reflection. Something had been hanging from the wagon's side. Something shiny, perhaps a small mirror or a piece of polished tin left by a teamster. And in that reflection, captured in reverse, was a series of numbers. Painted on a small sign or crate Vex was standing near. 9, 4, 2, 6, A. Kate stared, her mind racing. The numbers meant nothing to her, but they were clear, sharp as a knife cut. She finished the process, washed the plate, and held the glass negative up to the weak candlelight, shielding the flame with her hand. The image was eerie, a phantom of the violence, and at its heart, a secret. She did not sleep. At dawn, she found Sheriff Price. Alma Price held the glass plate to the rising sun. Her pale eyes narrowed. "It is him. All right. Vex, blurry, but it is him." "Not just him," Kate said, her finger tracing the air. "The numbers. Here, reflected." Price looked closer, pulling a small magnifying glass from her vest pocket. She studied the reverse digits. 9426A. "Well, I will be—" "Miss Whitaker, you may be a better detective than you are a schoolteacher." "What is it?" "It is a registry number," Price said, her voice grim. "From the Territorial Land Office over in Prescott. That is a file code. Pike is not just guarding his claim, he is inventorying it. The ride to Prescott took a day. Kate rode with a settler family heading for supplies, the glass plate wrapped in velvet and hidden in her satchel. The town was larger than the raw settlement, with 2 saloons, a hotel, and a solid-looking courthouse that also housed the land registry. The registry office smelled of stale cigar smoke, aging paper, and the fine, gritty dust that got into everything. The man behind the counter was named Hobson. He was a small, pale man, with a high-domed forehead and nervous, ink-stained hands that constantly fiddled with a blotter. "May I help you, miss?" he asked, his voice a reedy whine. "I need to see a file," Kate said, placing a piece of paper on the counter. She had written the number down. Registry file 9426A. Clerk Hobson's hands froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving it the color of old parchment. He looked from the paper to her face, a new, sharp fear in his eyes. That file is not available," he stammered, pushing the paper back toward her. "Why not?" Kate asked, her voice polite but firm. "It is in archival review," he said, avoiding her gaze. "A temporary hold, for clarification. Clarification on what it concerns the lands in the Canyon de Chelly area. Does it not?" Hobson's panic visibly grew. "I am not at liberty to discuss the contents of a restricted file. Miss, you will have to submit a formal written request. It could take weeks." He turned away, shuffling a stack of documents, his hands trembling. He pulled open a wide, shallow drawer at his desk, searching for a form. Kate did not move. She leaned forward, her gaze sharp. In the open drawer, beneath a pile of blank deeds, she saw it, a heavy brass seal, resting on a fresh black ink pad. Next to it, a small leather roll, unclasped, revealing the sharp, metal tips of small carving tools, and beside that, a half-empty bottle of ink remover. Hobson saw her looking. He slammed the drawer shut with a crash that rattled the inkwells on his desk. "There is the form," he snapped, shoving a paper at her. "Now, if you will excuse me, I am very busy." Kate took the form. She knew a fake when she saw one. Her own father had been a printer, and she knew the clean, deep bite of an official press, and she knew the look of tools used for forgery. Hobson was not just a clerk. He was Pike's artist. She returned to the valley with the setting sun, the knowledge a cold stone in her stomach. She told Price and Miguel what she had seen. "A forger's kit," Price muttered, kicking at the dust. "He is faking the seals, the signatures. He is building a paper wall. And now that he knows you are looking, he will report to Pike," Miguel finished, his face dark. "Kate, you are in more danger than before." That night, Kate was exhausted. She had been sleeping in a small tent pitched near the supply shed, too tired to arrange proper lodging. The air was cool and still. She fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, only to be torn from it by a sound that would haunt her. The roar. She woke to heat and a terrible, brilliant light. "Fire!" The scream was hers. The supply shed was not a building. It was an inferno. Flames poured from the windows and licked up the dry wooden sides, roaring into the black sky. "Fire!" she screamed again, scrambling from her tent. People were running now, settlers emerging from their tents and wagons, their faces stark and terrified in the firelight. "Bucket Brigade," a man shouted, and a line formed from the community, well. But Kate just stared, her mind numb. Her books, her mother's journal, tucked into her trunk for safety. The slates, the primers, everything. The school was gone before it had even begun. She saw something through the smoke, a dark shape inside the collapsing doorway. The large, metal-banded chest where Miguel stored his most valuable trade goods and, she knew, his ledgers. He was away in Santa Fe, buying seed. "Miguel's chest!" she cried, running forward. The heat was a physical blow, searing her skin, stealing her breath. She could not get within 20 feet. "Get back, woman!" a man yelled, grabbing her arm. And then a figure moved past her, silent as a shadow. Emerging from the darkness behind the crowd, it was Ashki Nez. He was carrying a wet horse blanket. He did not look at her. He did not speak. He simply ran, low to the ground, and disappeared into the wall of flame. Kate stopped breathing. The crowd gasped. A full 10 seconds passed. It was an eternity. Then he was back, bursting out, dragging the heavy chest by one handle. The metal band smoked, and the corner of his blanket was on fire. He hauled it clear of the flames and dropped it, beating out the fire on the blanket with his bare hands. The shed's roof collapsed inward with a final, explosive whoosh, sending a geyser of sparks high into the night. Ashki stood, his chest heaving, his face streaked with soot. He turned and looked at Kate. His dark eyes held the reflection of the fire. "Your school is gone," he said, his voice flat. You saved the chest," she said, trembling, a strange mix of terror and awe filling her. "Why were you here?" He gestured to the ground near the shed's foundation, where the flames had not yet reached. A dark, oily stain soaked the dirt. "Kerosene. I smelled it on the wind. I watched the water. Tonight, I watched the fire." He looked at her, his assessment complete. "This was for you." The next morning, the settlers stood in a somber circle around the smoking, blackened patch of ground. Sheriff Price was kicking through the debris, her face set in a grim mask. When Miguel Ortega rode in, his face went gray. He saw the ruin and swung off his horse before it had even stopped. Kate met him, pointing to the scorched but intact chest. "He saved it. Ashki Nez." He went inside. Miguel's relief was so profound his knees buckled. He ran his hands over the hot metal, then fumbled with the key. He opened it. The top layer of blankets was charred, but the contents below were safe. He lifted out a thick, leather-bound ledger and a roll of oilcloth maps. He looked at Kate, at Sheriff Price, and at Ashki, who had appeared at the edge of the circle, watching. "This," Miguel said, his voice shaking with anger, "is what they were after, not your books. Kate, this." He spread the ledger open. It was full of neat columns, names, dates, payments. Harlan Vex, $50. Security. Clerk Hobson, $100. Filing fees. It is all here. Pike's payroll. Then he unrolled the map. It was not a simple map of trails. It was a technical drawing, showing layers of rock and a blue line that snaked, not on the surface, but beneath it. "This is his plan," Miguel said, his finger tracing the blue line. "He knows where the aquifer runs. He is not just stealing the land. He's planning to tap the headwater, divert the underground springs to his silver mine. He will dry this entire valley, every field, every well, from below. He will make it a desert so he can buy the dust for nothing." A cold silence fell. Sheriff Price broke it. "It just got worse. I received a telegraph from the territorial judge. He has officially suspended my warrant for Vex. He cited lack of reliable evidence. Pike's hand is in Prescott, and it is in Santa Fe. The law is tied." Kate felt a wave of despair. They had the proof. They had the motive, and it meant nothing. Later that day, she walked, not knowing where she was going, her shoes carrying her away from the settlement, toward the red rock hogans of the Dine. She felt hollowed out. She found an old woman sitting in the shade of a juniper, a loom set up before her. Her hands, wrinkled and strong, moved with a steady, practiced rhythm, weaving a complex pattern of red and black. She looked up as Kate approached, her eyes as clear and deep as the sky. It was Bigay, the woman Miguel had called Ashki's grandmother, though Kate knew it meant a deeper, respected elder relationship. Kate, broken and exhausted, found herself telling the story. The fire, the numbers, the map, the useless warrant. Bigay listened, her hands never stopping their work. The shuttle passed back and forth, a quiet, rhythmic sound. When Kate finished, her voice raw, Bigay finally spoke, her English as careful as Ashki's. "You are the woman who carries glass to sea," she said, her voice like the dry rustle of leaves. "But you do not see this place. Pike uses paper to lie. The land does not lie." She pointed to the canyon walls, to the streak of darker rock that meant water, to the way the plants clustered in the dry washes. "If you stay, you must learn to see the truth. Learn the way of the water. Learn the way of the wind. Learn the land he wants to kill." Ashki stepped around the side of the hogan. "Grandmother, she is a white woman. This is not her way." "She stays," Bigay said simply, not looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on Kate. "That makes it her way. She has the fire of a survivor. Now she must learn to see. You will teach her." Ashki turned to Kate. His reluctance was a wall she could almost touch. Teaching an outsider the secret places, the way of his people, went against everything he had learned from the long walk. "Please," Kate said, her voice finding a strength she did not know she possessed. She stood up straighter, wiping the soot from her face. "He burned my school. He will not burn me out. I am staying. If paper and law will not stop him, then the land will. Will you teach me?" He stared at her, his black eyes searching hers. He saw the fear, but he also saw the core of iron beneath it, the same stubbornness he had seen that first day. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Before the sun, at the spring, do not be late." That night, the three of them, Kate, Miguel, and Sheriff Price, met by candlelight over the scorched chest. "Pike is hosting a large auction for the railroad investors in 3 weeks," Miguel said. "He needs to show them he has clear title and full water rights to sell them their parcels." "Then we have 3 weeks, Price said, her hand resting on the butt of her pistol. "We have to expose that grant as a fraud before he can sell it." Kate looked at the map, at the ledgers. "He thinks he burned the evidence. He does not know what we have, and he does not know what I am about to learn." The air before dawn was cold, smelling of stone and damp earth. Kate met Ashki at the spring as promised. She was dressed in her practical split skirt and sturdy boots. Her camera and a new box of glass plates she had purchased in Prescott strapped to the mule. Her school, for now, was a patch of shade under a cottonwood tree, and her new slates were smooth pine boards Miguel had planed for her. Ashki looked at the mule, at the heavy camera box. He said nothing, just handed her a strip of dried meat and a small water skin. "You will be slow," he said. "I will keep up," Kate replied, her voice firm. "And this," she patted the camera, "is why we are doing this. It is the proof." He did not argue. He simply turned and began to walk, his moccasins making no sound on the rock. She followed, leading the mule. Their path followed the blue line on Miguel's stolen map. It was not a trail, but a series of whispers. They walked along dry creek beds, Ashki pointing out the darker, richer soil that proved water ran beneath. They climbed to a high mesa, where the wind had swept the rock clean, revealing the foundations of an ancient stone structure, a round kiva half sunk into the earth. "The old ones," Ashki said, his voice low. He touched a stone. "They knew where the water lived." Kate set up her camera. The process was slow, difficult. She had to erect her dark tent, coat the plate, run to the camera, expose the image, and run back before the collodion dried in the desert air. Ashki watched, his arms crossed. At first, his impatience was a tangible thing, but as he saw the care, the precision, and the sheer physical labor of it, his expression changed. "This is your seeing?" he asked, as she washed the plate. The image of the Kiva ruins appearing against the backdrop of the distant silver mine. "This is my truth," she said, holding it up. This proves this land was lived on. It is not empty. It is not Pike's to take. This picture does not lie." He grunted, but it was not a grunt of dismissal. As they walked, he would stop, pointing to the ground. "This," he said, indicating a faint, deep impression. "Shod horse, a heavy man, riding hard, from Pike's camp." He walked a few feet, pointing to something else, a pattern so faint Kate could not see it at all. "This is Vex's man. He limps on the left." He knelt by a different, softer print. "This is my cousin. He passed this way this morning, following the sheep." He showed her the rounded, soft print of a moccasin. "The shod horse cuts the earth. We walk with the earth. You see the difference." "The horse's print is a wound," Kate said, her mind working. He looked at her, surprised. "Yes." The next day, she returned the lesson. Her small class of children, both settler and dine, gathered on blankets under the cottonwood. The fire had made her a symbol, and the parents, seeing her determination, sent their children. Ashki watched from a distance as she took a piece of charcoal and wrote on a pine board. "This is your name," she said to a small, shy dine girl. "It is who you are." She guided the girl's hand, and the child's face lit with a profound, sudden joy as she formed the letters of her own name. Ashki saw the power in it. It was a different kind of tracking, a different kind of sign. He saw the same focus in her eyes when she taught as when she made her glass plates. Their journey to find the headwater took them deep into a slot canyon, a narrow crack in the earth where the walls were so high and close that the sky was just a ribbon of blue. The air was cool, and the sound of their footsteps echoed. They found the spring, a miracle of moss and ferns, bubbling out of the red rock. And they found Pike's work. It was not subtle. A dozen men, Vex's men, were working. They had drilled into the rock face just above the spring, at a place where the canyon widened to form a natural dam that held back a small, high-country reservoir. Thick, black cables snaked down the rock. "Dynamite," Kate whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The mule, smelling the strangers, brayed. A man shouted, "Who is there?" Ashki grabbed Kate, pulling her and the mule back. Behind a screen of boulders, they hid, their backs pressed to the cold stone, listening as two of Vex's men walked by, rifles ready. "Just a coyote," one said, his voice rough. "Let us get this charge set. Pike wants this dam gone by the end of the week. He wants the water flowing to his mine by the time the railroad men get here." They watched for an hour as the men worked. This was the heart of the plan, not just to tap the water, but to steal it all at once, to blow the natural dam and send the entire reservoir's contents down a newly dug channel toward the silver mine. It would dry the valley in a single, catastrophic day. They slipped away as the sun began to set, the shadows in the canyon turning a deep, cold purple. They made camp in a hidden alcove, a place Ashki knew, with a high defensible position. They built no fire. The close call, the sight of the dynamite, had shaken Kate to her core. She sat, her arms wrapped around her knees, the smell of the black powder, the sheer, casual evil of it, brought back the smoke and the terror of the burning schoolhouse. "I hate fire," she said, her voice small in the vast silence. Ashki, who had been checking the mule's load, paused. He turned to her, his face unreadable in the twilight. "It is a tool," he said. "It is a monster," she whispered. She had never told anyone. "When I was a girl, in Missouri, we lived in a boarding house. It burned. The fire took the stairs, and we were trapped on the 3rd floor." She was shaking. My mother threw me out the window, into a blanket the men were holding, but she waited too long for my father. He never came, and Kate closed her eyes. "I remember the smell, the heat. I'm afraid of it. I will always be afraid." He was silent for a long time. The wind sighed through the canyon. He came and sat, not close, but near. "I know fear," he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. "When I was a boy, they came, the soldiers, blue coats, like Pike. They burned the hogans. They burned the fields. They shot the sheep." He looked at his hands. "They marched us, many days, many nights, the long walk, to Huildi, the place of sorrow." His voice was flat, a recitation of a truth too terrible for emotion. "My grandmother, she fell. I tried to help her up. A soldier hit me with his rifle. He stopped. He left her. The snow was red. We lost so many. We lost the land. We lost ourselves." He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw the man behind the stoic warrior. She saw the boy who had been marched, the man who had survived. "We are all afraid of fire, schoolteacher. We just have different flames." They did not speak again that night. A bond had been forged, a terrible, shared understanding of loss. Sheriff Alma Price met Kate not in the settlement, but on the open road. She rode up as if by chance, reining in her bay. "A hard ride, Miss Whitaker," she said, her voice casual. "A necessary one, Sheriff." Price reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. "This fell off a desk in Prescott. Thought it might interest you." It was a copy of Silas Pike's official land grant. Kate's eyes scanned it quickly. It looked official. The seals, the signatures. "Look at the last page," Price said, her eyes on the horizon. "The appendix, the list of consenting residents from the valley." Kate flipped the page. It was a long list of names, and beside almost every one, there was not a signature, but a crude, identical X. "He paid Hobson to witness these," Price said, her voice pure acid. "He claims every Dine head of household and every settler signed over their water rights for $1 apiece. Half these people, I know for a fact, were in Santa Fe on the date he claims. And," she pointed to one name, "this man, old Jedediah. He has been dead for 2 years. Pike is not just faking a few signatures. He is faking an entire community." "This is the proof," Kate whispered. "It is proof of fraud," Price said. "But the judge who signed this is in Pike's pocket. This paper is a lie, but it is a legal lie. You need more. You need to connect Pike to Vex. You need to connect Vex to the dynamite. Get me that, and I can ride past the judge and go straight to the territorial marshal." She took the papers back. "You never saw this." Miguel was playing his own dangerous game. He delivered a string of 10 prime horses to Pike's mining camp, his demeanor open and friendly. He shared coffee and tobacco with Harlan Vex. "It is a hard country," Miguel said, accepting a light for his cigarillo. "A man needs good horses to tame it." "And dynamite," Vex said, laughing. "We have got plenty of both. Thanks to Mr. Pike, this valley is about to have a new landlord." "I hear good things," Miguel said, his eyes cataloging the number of armed guards, the location of the powder cache, the new telegraph line they had strung to the mine. "To progress." "To progress," Vex echoed, lifting his tin cup. Miguel reported it all back to Kate and Ashki. "They are confident. They are moving fast. The dynamite is guarded, but the telegraph line is not." The day of the sandstorm, Kate and Ashki were hauling water in barrels from a clean, high spring, 2 miles from the settlement. The sky had been a pale, sickly yellow all morning. Ashki had been watching the horizon, his face tight. "It comes," he said, and the word was barely out of his mouth when the wind hit. It was not wind, it was a wall of red, a howling, screaming, solid thing that blotted out the sun. The world disappeared. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. Kate screamed, but the sound was stolen from her throat. The mule brayed in terror, kicked and bolted, disappearing into the red chaos. "Kate!" Ashki's voice was a shout, but it sounded like a whisper. He grabbed her, pulling her into the lee of a large boulder. "Stay down. Cover your face." He unslung his own blanket. throwing it over both of them, creating a small, dark tent. They huddled together, not as man and woman, but as two living things against the apocalypse. The wind shrieked, a physical weight trying to peel them from the rock. Sand and gravel hammered the blanket. "The water!" Kate yelled, thinking of the barrels. "The water is gone," he shouted back. "We live. That is all." They stayed there for 2 hours, huddled in the dark, breathing through their sleeves, their bodies pressed close for warmth against the sudden, penetrating cold. Kate could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back, or perhaps it was her own. She was terrified, but it was a different fear. It was not the sick fear of fire, but a clean, sharp fear of the world's power. And she was not alone. When the wind finally dropped, they emerged, gasping, into a world transformed. Everything was red. The sky, the ground, the air itself. They were caked in dust, their lips cracked, their eyes burning. The mule was gone. The water was gone. They were 2 miles from home. Ashki handed her his water skin. "A little." She drank, the water gritty with sand, and handed it back. He drank. They looked at each other. Two ghosts in a red world, and Kate saw him, truly saw him. Not as an Indian, not as a guide, but as a man who had sheltered her with his own body. He looked at her, and he saw not a weak white woman, but a person who had faced the storm and had not broken. He gave her a small, cracked smile. "Your hair," he said. She touched it. It was stiff with mud. A small, dry laugh escaped her. It was the first time she had laughed in weeks. They walked back to the settlement in silence, a new, deep respect between them. That night, Kate washed the grit from her skin. The fire had taken her mother's journal, but Miguel, on his trip to Santa Fe, had bought her a new, plain ledger. She opened it, uncapped her ink, and wrote, the candlelight flickering. "This land is not just beautiful," she wrote, the pen scratching. "It is memory." The sandstorm had scoured the valley, leaving the air clean and sharp, but the peace was a thin veneer over a tension that hummed, low and constant, in the air. Ashki Nez now patrolled the ridges above the settlement, a silent guardian, while Kate Whitaker rebuilt her school, not with wood, but with the loyalty of the children who came every morning to the shade of the cottonwood. Sheriff Alma Price rode into the settlement, not with a posse, but alone, leading a mule. She did not stop at the new well, but rode straight to Miguel Ortega's tent. Kate saw them, and a knot tightened in her stomach. "Miguel," Price said, her voice low and not meant for Kate's ears, though Kate drew closer, pretending to organize her new pine board slates. "I need a favor." "My inventory is your inventory, Alma," he said. "I need you to spread a rumor," Price said, her pale eyes hard. "I need you to do it in the right saloon, in the ear of the right man." "What rumor?" "I just sent Deputy Stevens on a hard ride to Santa Fe. Tell them he is carrying my official report and depositions. Tell them he has copies of Pike's grant, the real one from Prescott, and, let us say, Miss Whitaker's glass plates, the ones proving Vex was in the pass, and the ones linking Pike to the dynamite." Miguel's eyebrows rose. "But Kate has the plates right here." "I know," Price said, a small, grim smile touching her lips. "And so do we. But Harlan Vex does not. He is a dog on a short leash, and Pike is holding the other end. If Vex thinks the real proof is on the trail, he will do something stupid. He will try to get it, or he will panic and try to destroy the evidence he has here before the marshal can be dispatched." "You are throwing a rock at a wasp nest, amiga." "I am," Price agreed. "Now go throw it hard." Miguel left for the mining camp saloon an hour later, a wagon loaded with what he loudly proclaimed was the worst shipment of whiskey this side of the Pecos. The rock hit hard. 2 days later, Miguel returned, his face tight. Vex took the bait. He reported to Kate and Ashki, meeting them by the creek. He is terrified. He sent 2 men riding fast toward Santa Fe, likely to intercept your imaginary deputy. But he is also moving. He is consolidating. He is moving the dynamite from the canyon dam. He is taking it to the main railroad warehouse. The warehouse, Kate said, her mind racing. The one by the new bridge. He is getting it ready for the auction, Ashki said, his voice flat. He had been tracking Vex's men, and his own patience was wearing thin. He will show the investors he controls the water, and he has the tools to improve the land. The warehouse, Kate said again, her eyes fixed on Ashki. His company stamp was on the paperwork for the drilling. If the dynamite is in that warehouse, it must be logged. It must be stored in crates. His crates. You cannot go near it, Miguel said. It is guarded by a dozen of Vex's men. We need proof that dynamite is his. Kate insisted. The plate I took of the dam was from too far. I just have cables. I need the box. Ashki looked at her, then at the setting sun. He is afraid. A man who is afraid makes mistakes. He expects an attack from the road. He does not expect one from the inside. He turned to Kate. You and your box. You are slow, but your seeing is strong. Can you see in the dark? I can, she said, her heart beginning to pound. I have flash powder. It is bright, but it is fast. That night, the railroad yard was a landscape from a nightmare. Engines hissed steam. Steel hammered on steel, and the air was thick with coal smoke and curses. Ashki and 3 other Dine warriors moved like smoke, painted shadows in the industrial chaos. I will give you a distraction, Ashki had told her, his hand briefly touching her shoulder. When the shouting starts at the west gate, you have 5 minutes. No more. Miguel will get you to the door. Kate and Miguel crept along the side of the massive, corrugated tin warehouse. She was weighed down by a smaller, portable camera and a single prepared plate holder. A sudden, high-pitched yelling erupted from the west end of the yard, followed by the sound of panicked horses. Fire! The stables are on fire! It was a lie, but it was a good one. The guards at the warehouse door cursed and ran toward the commotion. Now, Miguel whispered, pulling a pry bar from his belt and snapping the cheap lock on the warehouse door. Go! Kate slipped inside. The warehouse was cavernous, a cathedral of shadows. It smelled of grease, grain, and burlap. She used a small shielded lantern, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work. She found the crates in a roped-off corner. Her breath caught. The crates were stacked high, and on the side of each one, stenciled in stark black paint, were the words, Danger, Explosive, and beneath it, a logo P, Mining and Freight Co. Silas Pike. She heard footsteps outside. The guards were returning. She had no time. She set the lantern down, aimed her camera, ripped the slide from the plate holder. She fumbled with a small packet of flash powder. Come on, she whispered, her voice trembling. The door burst open. Who is in here? A man shouted, lifting his own lantern. Kate ignited the powder. The explosion was a brilliant, blinding white flash, a miniature sun that illuminated every corner of the warehouse for one perfect, terrible second. It was followed by acrid, choking smoke. What in the hell? The guard yelled, blinded. Kate did not wait. She grabbed her camera, jammed the plate holder into her bag, and ran, diving behind a stack of barrels as 2 more guards ran in. She slipped out a side door, a ghost in the smoke, and did not stop running until she was clear of the yard, her lungs burning. Ashki met her in the rocks above the creek. He said nothing, just took the camera box from her trembling hands, his own hand steady and warm. Harlan Vex was a man pushed too far. The rumor about Santa Fe was a lie. The stable fire was a diversion, and his guards reported a small woman and a blinding flash in the dynamite store. He knew they had the proof. He struck back with the desperate, simple cruelty of a cornered animal. He came the next day, not to the settlement, but to the cottonwood tree. Kate was teaching the children, about a dozen now, were practicing their letters on the pine boards. Vex and 2 of his men rode their horses directly into the clearing, their expressions hard. The children scattered, screaming. All but 2, Thomas, a settler's son, stood frozen, and the little Dine girl, whose name Kate had learned was Zan, which meant joy, hid behind Kate's skirt. "Schoolteacher," Vex snarled, his eyes sweeping the scene. He looked tired and angry. "You have been a busy little bee?" "Get away from these children," Kate said, her voice low and shaking with rage. She pushed Zan behind her. "I am tired of this game," Vex said. Before Kate could move, he leaned down and grabbed Thomas by the arm, hauling him up. His other man grabbed Zan. The little girl did not scream. She bit him, hard. He yelped and slapped her, pulling her onto his saddle. "No!" Kate screamed, lunging forward. Vex pointed his pistol at her, not at her heart, at her feet. "Stop, right there!" He looked at the terrified, crying children, and then at her. "You want them back? You bring me what you have. All of it. The glass plates, the maps, the ledgers. Tonight, at the new railroad bridge. You come alone. If I see that Indian or the sheriff, these children pay the price." He wheeled his horse and rode away, the children disappearing into the dust. The mother's screams followed him. Kate stood paralyzed for a single second. Then she turned and ran, not to the settlement, but to the ridge. "Ashki!" He was already there, his face a mask of cold fury. He had seen. "You are not going alone," he said. He said, "I do not care what a dead man says." Ashki cut in, his voice like flint. "He is a fool. He chose a place he thinks is a fortress. It is a trap, for him." The new railroad bridge was a skeleton. It was built of steel trestles and wooden railroad ties, laid across a deep, black arroyo. There was no decking, just gaps of empty air between the ties. A cold, miserable rain had begun to fall, making the wood slick and treacherous. Vex was in the center of the span, a single lantern casting a pool of sickly yellow light. The 2 children were tied to a steel support beam. "Come on out, schoolteacher," Vex yelled, his voice echoing in the canyon. "Bring me my property." Kate stepped out of the rocks, holding a wooden plate box. "Here, let the children go." "Throw the box over," Vex shouted. "Not until they are safe." "Now," Ashki whispered from the darkness beside her. He and 3 warriors, their faces streaked with black pigment, melted into the shadows under the bridge. Kate walked forward onto the ties. "Harlan, it is over. Let them go." A rifle shot cracked, not from Vex, from one of his men, hidden in the trestles. The bullet splintered the wood at Kate's feet. "It is a trap," she screamed. Then the night exploded. Ashki's men attacked from both ends of the bridge. One warrior loosed an arrow that took Vex's hidden sniper in the throat. The man toppled from the trestle, his scream cut short. Vex roared, firing his pistol into the darkness. Ashki burst from the shadows and tackled him. The 2 men, big and powerful, crashed onto the narrow ties, a tangle of limbs, fighting hand to hand over the black void. Kate did not hesitate. She ran, stumbling, her boots slipping on the wet wood. To the children. They were crying, their hands bound thick with rope. "I cannot untie it," Thomas cried. "It is too tight." Kate fumbled with the wet, swollen knot. It was impossible. She heard a grunt and a crash as Ashki slammed Vex's head against the steel rail. She looked. Vex was down, but one of his men was taking aim at Ashki, whose back was turned. Ashki. The man fired. Ashki moved, but the bullet tore through his shoulder. He grunted, stumbling. His young warrior, Natani, leaped at the gunman, a knife flashing, but the man fired again. Natani cried out, clutching his stomach, and fell. Kate looked at the rope, at the fight, at the children. She had no time. She pulled the small, sharp knife she kept for cutting photo mats from her boot. She could not cut the rope from above. She did the only thing she could. She dropped from the ties, her small body swinging down into the blackness, her hands grabbing the cold, narrow steel I-beam that ran beneath. She was hanging, suspended over the dark arroyo, the rain lashing her face. "Hold on!" she yelled, her voice raw. She pulled herself along the beam, hand over hand, until she was beneath the children. She could feel her palms tearing on the rough steel. She reached up, the knife between her teeth, grabbed the rope, and began to saw. It was thick, wet, and stubborn. Her arms burned, and her hands were slick with rain and her own blood. But she did not stop. The rope snapped. The children were free. "Crawl!" Kate screamed from below. "Back to the rocks, crawl!" Above, Ashki had finished his fight. Vex was unconscious, his hands bound. The last of Vex's men had fled. Ashki was holding his wounded shoulder, blood leaking between his fingers. He looked, his face a mask of pain and shock, as Kate hauled herself, shaking and sobbing, back onto the bridge. They carried Natani back to Bege's hogan. The bullet was deep in his belly. "He is dying," Bege said, her face carved from stone. "No," Kate said, her fear replaced by a cold calm. "Not if I can help it. Someone ride to the railroad camp. Get the doctor, the one who drinks. Pay him." For the rest of the night, Kate, her hands bandaged, worked alongside Bege. She who was terrified of fire. She built the fire, she boiled the water. She held the lantern for the white-haired, whiskey-smelling doctor as he cursed and dug for the bullet. She learned to press poultices, to clean wounds, to hold a hand steady in the face of death. Natani lived. As the first gray light touched the canyon, Ashki, his own arm in a sling, found her washing the blood from her hands in the creek. He stood beside her for a long time. He touched her arm, his fingers gentle. "Shash Yazi," he said, his voice soft. "What?" she asked, not looking up, her voice thick with exhaustion. "Little Bear," he said. "It is a name for a small woman with a strong heart and sharp claws." A horse was thundering toward them. It was Miguel, his face pale, his horse lathered. "Bad news," he yelled, sliding from the saddle. "Pike knows. He knows Vex failed. He is not waiting. My telegraph contact. The auction is not in 3 weeks. He moved it up. It is in 3 nights. 3 nights? Kate whispered. It was impossible. They were wounded, exhausted. "We do not have enough," Miguel said. "The plate of the crate is good, but it is not a final—" "Wait," Kate said. She ran to her tent, fumbling for her original box of plates, the one she had saved from the ambush. She pulled out the very first one she had taken, the picture of the bent juniper tree. "This one," she said, her voice shaking, holding it up to the new sun. "I was so focused on the tree, I never looked at the background." Ashki and Miguel crowded around. There, in the background, small but clear, was the railroad siding, visible from the ridge, and on the siding was a single, parked railroad car. "So?" Miguel asked. "Look at the numbers," Kate whispered, her bloody finger tracing the image. "P&A 406. Pike in Arizona," Miguel breathed. "His personal freight line. That car was there the day you arrived, the day before the ambush." Kate looked at her other plate, the one from the warehouse, her face lighting with a fierce, sudden hope. The juniper photo puts his car at the warehouse, and the flash photo puts his company seal on the dynamite inside the warehouse. And your ledger, Miguel. It puts Vex on his payroll. Miguel finished, a slow smile spreading across his face. "It is a chain," Ashki said, his dark eyes meeting Kate's. "It is a chain," she agreed. "And 3 nights is not much time, but I think, this time, it is enough." Silas Pike did not wait for his auction. He did not wait for the law. because he believed the law was whatever he had paid for, with Harlan Vex captured and his evidence chain compromised. Pike acted with the brute force of a man who had nothing left to lose but time. The explosion was not a crack. It was a concussion that rolled down the canyon, a deep, guttural thump that was felt in the bones. It came at 3 a.m, shaking Kate from a light. Exhausted sleep. The ground trembled. She ran out of her tent, joining the other settlers who were stumbling into the open, their faces pale in the moonlight. "What was it?" a woman cried. "An earthquake." Ashki Nez was already on his feet, his arm in its sling, his face turned toward the high country. He did not need to see it. He could smell it on the air, the sharp, sulphurous bite of dynamite and the new, sudden sound of a massive, rushing river where one had not been before. "He has done it," Ashki said, his voice a low, dead thing. "He has blown the dam." The sun rose on a valley in morning. The small, brave creek, the one that gave life to the cottonwoods and the corn, was already diminished. By noon, it was a trickle. By late afternoon, it was a ribbon of damp mud. Pike's new channel, blown from the rock, was diverting the entire reservoir. The water thundered past the silver mine, a torrent of stolen life, leaving the canyon floor to bake in the sun. The cornfields were the first to die. The leaves, so green and hopeful the day before, began to curl, to gray, to wither. The sound of the wind was no longer a song. It was the dry rattle of death. Panic followed. It was a suffocating, ugly thing. "He has won," a settler said, his voice breaking as he looked at his dry well. "He has beaten us. We have to leave." Men began to argue. Women wept. The fragile community Kate had been building was fracturing, turning on itself in fear. And then the guards arrived. Harlan Vex, it turned out, had not been unconscious for long. He had been handed over to Sheriff Price's deputy, but before he could even be jailed, the territorial judge, citing Price's irregular behavior, had him released on his own recognizance. He was back, and he was furious. Vex and a dozen of Pike's hired guns rode into the valley, not as a raiding party, but as an occupying army. They did not attack. They did not need to. They set up armed posts at the dry creek bed, at the spring, and at the entrance to the pass. "Mr. Pike has legal title," Vex announced, his voice carrying over the stunned silence of the settlers. "The water now belongs to the S.P. Mining Company. Any of you drawing water from a dry hole is trespassing. He suggests you be on your way by morning. For your own safety. Of course." The people were trapped. They had no water, and their only exit was guarded by the men who had stolen it. Kate Whitaker stood and watched. She saw the despair. She felt the suffocating heat, and the fear, the old, cold fear of fire, rose in her throat. This was a different kind of fire, a dry one, but it was just as deadly. She turned and walked away from the crowd. She walked to Begay's Hogan. The old woman was sitting at her loom, her hands still. "He has taken the water?" Kate said, her voice a dry rasp. "Yes," Begay said. "The people are broken. They are leaving. The sheep are thirsty," Begay said, as if it were the same thing. "But the sheep do not run to the wolf. They follow the bell." Kate looked at the old woman, at the lines of strength and sorrow in her face. I do not know what to do." "You are Shash Yazeh," Begay said, her eyes sharp. "Little bear, you have claws. You have a voice. They are waiting for the bell." Kate walked back to the settlement. She stood on a wagon bed, her small figure silhouetted against the dying fields. "He took the main water," she cried out, her voice thin but carrying. "He did not take it all." The settlers, the dying, they all stopped. They turned to her. "There is a side creek," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Up in the North Canyon. The one Ashki showed me. It is small, but it is wet." She looked at the women, at the mothers who had watched her teach. "He has guns. But we have hands. We cannot fight him, but we can outlive him. We will not leave. We will build a trough. It was a spark, a small, impossible spark. But it caught. The women, who had been weeping, looked at each other. They looked at their thirsty children. Kate led them. They took axes. They took saws. They tore down the abandoned, half-built saloon, the symbol of the speculation that had started this. They split the pine boards. They worked with a frantic, furious energy. Ashki and his men, his arms still bound, stood on the ridges watching Vex's guards, their rifles a clear and present warning. While Kate and the women built, Ashki went to work. He left the valley, taking 2 of his best men. They moved not toward the guards, but toward the mine. They found the new, massive iron pump Pike had installed, the one designed to pull the stolen water up to the silver processing plant. They worked with knives and stone hammers. They cut the thick leather drive belts. They dropped heavy stones into the gear mechanism. They wedged a steel pry bar into the main piston and broke it. The pump, Pike's expensive, powerful new toy, was silenced. It was a small victory, but it was not nothing. By evening, Kate's brigade had built it, a long, crude wooden aqueduct, a flume held together with nails and rope and desperation. It snaked for half a mile, from the small, shaded creek, down the canyon wall, to the community well. When Kate gave the signal, the women at the top broke the small dam of rocks and mud. They watched, a trickle, then a stream. The water, clear and cold, began to move. It filled the wooden trough. It ran. It spilled. It leaked. But it ran. A cheer, a raw, hoarse sound of triumph, rose from the women as the first stream of clean water splashed into the dusty well. They had water. It was not enough to save the corn. It was, perhaps, just enough to survive. Sheriff Alma Price rode in as the celebration began. Her face was as gray as the dying fields. She did not look at the flume. She looked at Kate. "They did it," Price said, her voice flat. She swung down from her horse. "I just got the wire. The territorial judge. He has suspended me. She stammered, so angry she could barely speak. Overreaching authority. Aggravating a sensitive situation. Interfering with legal commerce. I am to hand in my badge and await a formal hearing." "Alma, no," Kate said, her heart sinking. "Pike has won this round," Price said. She unpinned the simple tin star from her vest. She stared at it, her face a knot of fury and helplessness. "He has the law, he has the water, and now he has no police." She looked at Kate, at the soot on her face, at the raw blisters on her hands. "But he does not have the valley. Not yet." Price shoved the badge into Kate's hand. It was still warm. "It is just a piece of tin, but it is a symbol. He can take mine. He cannot take what it means." Her pale eyes met Kate's. "If I fall, you continue. Do not let him win. Kate." The world, which had already given too much, decided to give more. The smell came on the wind. Not of water, but of smoke. Not the clean scent of juniper, but the thick, oily acridness of a forest on fire. "Look!" a man shouted, pointing to the high ridge to the west. A plume of dark, roiling smoke was visible against the sunset. A wildfire. It had been burning in the high country for days, but the wind had shifted. It was coming toward them, and it was coming fast. This was Kate's nightmare. The roaring heat, the smell of burning pine, the red, consuming monster. She froze. The badge in her hand felt impossibly heavy. She could hear the screams from her childhood, feel the heat on her skin. "It is the end," a woman wailed. "The fire will finish what the drought began." "No." The voice was Ashki's. He was standing beside her, his face grim. "The fire is a tool. Remember, we can turn it." Kate looked at him, then at the terror on the faces of the people. They were looking at her. The bell. Bigay's words. Kate Whitaker took a deep, shuddering breath. The air burned her lungs. She closed her eyes for 1 second and saw not the boarding house, but the children on the bridge. She saw Natani's face as she held the lamp. She opened her eyes. The fear was still there. It was a cold, sick thing. But the fear of failure was, for the first time, greater. "Get shovels!" she said, her voice coming out as a harsh croak. She cleared her throat and yelled, "Get shovels and axes and wet blankets!" The people stared. "We are not running," she shouted, pinning the tin star to her own dress. It was crooked, but it was there. "We are going to fight. Ashki, show us how to use it." Ashki gave a sharp, quick nod. He took command of the men. "We cut a line, here, at the creek bed. We make the earth bare." Kate took the women. "We need backburns. We will fight the fire, with fire." She, who was terrified of flames, was the one who held the torch. Her hand, wrapped in a wet rag, shook so hard she almost dropped it. "Now," Ashki said, his voice calm in the chaos. Kate touched the torch to the dry grass on their side of the new firebreak. The flames whooshed, catching instantly, racing away from them, toward the advancing wildfire. She was leading. She was commanding. She was facing the thing she feared most, and she did not break. The battle raged for hours. It was a scene from hell. The air was unbreathable. The heat was intense. Men and women, settler and dine, worked side by side, beating at sparks, digging, coughing, their faces black with soot. In the middle of this chaos, Harlan Vex saw his chance. He was not interested in the fire. He was interested in the man who had humiliated him on the bridge. He saw Ashki, his sling discarded, working with his one good arm to clear brush. Vex came at him from the smoke, a knife in his hand. He was not a fool. He led Ashki away from the others, into a narrow alley of rock near the spring, where the ground was slick with moss and the water from Kate's new flume. "Indian," Vex snarled. "You and me. You should have let me die." "I should have," Ashki said, his own knife now in his hand. They fought, not with skill, but with a desperate, brawling hatred. The wet rock was treacherous. They slipped, crashed against the walls. Ashki, with his wounded shoulder, was at a disadvantage. Vex was bigger, stronger. Vex lunged. Ashki sidestepped, but his foot slipped. Vex crashed into him, and they both went down, sliding, tumbling over the edge of a 3-meter drop into a shallow pool. Ashki landed first. The breath knocked from him. Vex landed on top, but his head struck the rock. He was stunned, and he was sinking, his face going under the water. Ashki, his shoulders screaming in pain, did the thing he had been taught. He did not let a man drown. His reflex was faster than his hatred. He grabbed Vex's hair, hauled his head above the water. Vex sputtered, coughed, and his eyes focused. He was alive, and he was an animal. He lunged, not with his knife, but with his teeth. He bit Ashki's good hand, the one that held him, biting down to the bone. Ashki roared in pain and reflexively let go. Vex scrambled out of the pool, crab walking backward, his eyes wild. "This is not over," he hissed, and then he was gone, disappearing into the smoke and the night. Ashki climbed out of the water, his hand and his shoulder bleeding, his entire body aching. He had saved his enemy, and his enemy had escaped. As the night wore on, the wind shifted, the backburns held, the firebreak worked, the wildfire, meeting the barren, burned earth, slowed, turned, and began to burn back on itself. The camp was saved. At dawn, Miguel Ortega rode in, his horse nearly dead. He had not been at the fire. He had been on the road to Prescott. He found Kate, asleep on her feet, leaning against a wagon wheel, her face black, her dress scorched. "Kate," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I did it." "Did what?" she mumbled. The judge, Pike's judge, he was on his way here, in a carriage, to legalize the water diversion and sign the eviction notices. I had an accident. My trade wagon, it lost a wheel, right in the middle of the narrowest part of the pass. A slow smile spread across Kate's soot-caked face. An accident. A terrible accident, Miguel agreed, his eyes twinkling. It will take him at least a day to get it cleared. He is very angry. He said this is not legal, and I said, Judge, if you want this legalized, you have to wait for everyone to be there. Kate laughed. It was a rusty, painful sound. The sun rose. The valley was scarred. The fields were dead. The fire had left a black ring around them. But the people were still there. They had water, even if it was just a trickle. And they had one more day. The final legal move, the auction, was still to come. The night before the auction was heavy and still. The smoke from the wildfire had settled in the high canyons, and the moon, when it rose, was a dull copper red. The valley was wounded. The corn was dead. The ground was black with ash, and the main creek was a scar of dry, cracked mud. But the people had not left. Kate Whitaker stood on the ridge, at the place where she had taken her first photograph. The bent juniper tree was a dark silhouette against the bruised sky. She still wore Sheriff Price's tin star pinned to her soot-stained dress. It felt as heavy as a stone. Ashki Nez stood with her. His wounded shoulder was tightly bound, and the bite mark on his hand was a raw, red crescent. He was quiet, watching not the valley, but her. He had seen her face down the fire, seen her command the people, seen her hold the dying and bring them back. He had called her Little Bear, and he knew he had been right. She turned to him, the exhaustion of the past week settling on her, making her small. I am so tired, Ashki, and I'm afraid, not of fire anymore. I'm afraid of tomorrow. I am afraid all this, all we have done, will not be enough. He moved closer. He did not touch her, but she could feel the warmth and the strength of him. We have done what is right. She let out a small, bitter laugh. I am not like the women here. Or you. I am a school teacher. I came with books and glass plates. I know Latin. I know history. I do not know how to be this. She looked down at her hands, which were blistered and raw. I do not know how to live in this hard a world. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears in the dim light. You see me, but you do not see me. You are a warrior. You have survived things I cannot imagine. You deserve a woman who is as strong as this land. You do not want a virgin like me. The words were a whisper, a confession of inadequacy, of a fear deeper than fire. Ashki was very still. The moonlight touched the high planes of his face. He watched her for a long moment, seeing not the dirt or the exhaustion, but the iron will that had refused to bend. A slow smile touched his mouth. It was a rare, beautiful thing that lit his dark eyes. He reached out, his wounded hand, and his fingers, rough and gentle, touched her cheek. That's all I want, he said, his voice a low rumble, softer than she had ever heard it. She stared at him, confused, her heart stopping. He did not mean her innocence. He meant the spirit, the fire, the unbroken core. He meant the woman who had not been shaped by the world's cruelty, but had chosen to fight it. He was a man who had seen too much. He had no interest in a woman who was already broken. He wanted the one who was still whole, still fighting, still capable of hope. He saw her confusion and his smile deepened. I choose you, Kate Whitaker, Shash Yazi. I have chosen you, and I will wait. Tomorrow. A season, a lifetime. I have chosen. He did not kiss her. It was not a promise of passion. It was a promise of forever. It was the most profound commitment she had ever known, offered on the edge of a cliff, in a dying valley. A clatter of rocks from the trail below broke the spell. They both turned, their hands moving to weapons. Ashki's to his knife, Kate's to the small pistol Miguel had given her. A rider was coming up the trail. Not a soldier, not Vex. It was a woman, riding a fine-boned Tennessee mare. She rode side saddle, but with a confidence that spoke of Eastern riding schools. She wore a dark, tailored traveling suit, and her face, in the moonlight, was pale, intelligent, and composed. She reined in her horse. Miss Whitaker, I presume. Her voice was crisp, educated, and held no trace of the West. And Mr. Nez. Who are you? Kate asked, the badge on her dress giving her an authority she did not feel. My name is Charlotte Hale. The woman said, I am counsel for the ATSP Mining and Freight Company. She was Pike's lawyer. She dismounted with fluid grace, not waiting for an invitation. I have come as an act of good faith. My client, Mr. Pike, is a man of vision. He does not appreciate complications, but he is not ungenerous. She looked at Kate, her eyes sharp, analytical, completely dismissing Ashki. He respects your spirit. Miss Whitaker, he believes it has simply been misdirected by your associates. Get to the point, Ashki said, his voice flat. Charlotte Hale's gaze flickered to him, annoyed at the interruption. The point, Mr. Nez, is that this valley is lost. The auction tomorrow is a formality. The contracts are signed, the railroad is coming, the water is, by law, diverted. She turned back to Kate. My client is prepared to offer you a settlement, a teaching position at the academy in Prescott, a very generous salary, and a private stipend of, let us say, $500. Enough for a new start. A safe one. All he asks is that you cease this unfortunate interference, that you give us your trinkets. She gestured at Kate's camera. Kate felt a cold rage that burned brighter than any fire. She looked at this woman, who thought the world could be bought and sold in a courtroom. This is my school, Kate said, her voice quiet. She touched the tin star. Do not be a fool, Hale said, her politeness fraying. You have nothing. You are a single penniless woman, and he, she flicked her gaze at Ashki, is a savage. You cannot fight the United States government. We are not fighting the government, Kate said. We are fighting Silas Pike, and we have everything. She walked to her mule, where her plate box was strapped. She pulled them out, one by one, laying them on the flat rock. This is Harlan Vex in Chokecherry Pass, she said, her voice the clear, steady voice of a teacher, with the land office file number 9426A reflected in the wagon, the file Clerk Hobson was forging. Charlotte Hale's face tightened. This, Kate continued, holding up the Juniper photo, is Mr. Pike's personal rail car, P&A 406. It was at the railroad warehouse the day I arrived, before the ambush, before the dynamite. She held up the final plate, the one from the flash. And this, Miss Hale, is Mr. Pike's company seal, S.P. Mining, on the crates of dynamite inside that warehouse, the same dynamite used to destroy the dam. Ashki stepped forward. He did not speak. He unrolled the small cloth bag he carried and emptied its contents onto the rock, a 6-inch piece of black blasting cable, cut clean, a small, brass detonator pin. The cable from the dam matches the spools in her picture. Ashki said, the pin matches the open crates. We have the chain. Charlotte Hale looked at the evidence, at the glass plates, at the metal. Her perfect, pale composure cracked. She saw the story, clear and undeniable, laid out not in paper, but in glass and steel. Kate stepped closer. We are not leaving, she said, and tomorrow, at your formality, we will be there, and when Mr. Pike is found liable, his fines will not be going to the territory. They will be paid to this valley. They will build a new school, made of stone. They will dig a new well, one so deep no mine can dry it, and they will build a community stable. For everyone. That is our price for what he has done. Charlotte Hale stared, her face pale with fury. She had come to negotiate with a hysterical schoolteacher and had found a general. "You are children," she hissed, her voice shaking. "You are playing with law you do not understand. You will be crushed." She mounted her horse, her movements jerky and angry. "Tomorrow, you will see what true power is." She wheeled the mare and galloped down the trail. Kate and Ashki stood in the silence. The weight of what they had done, what they had declared, settled on them. When they returned to the settlement, Bigay was waiting for them by the light of a small fire. She had seen the strange woman ride away. She looked at Kate, at the star, at the exhaustion, at the new, hard resolve. The old woman's face was a map of ancient knowledge. She held out her hand. In it was a small, woven strip of cloth, the color of a perfect, cloudless sky, the color of deep, clean water. "For the water," Bigay said, her voice a soft rustle. "For the truth. You speak for the valley now. You are dying. You are Little Bear." Kate's hands trembled as she took it. Ashki watched as she untied the scorched ribbon from her hair and, instead, tied the blue strip around her wrist. It was a new badge, a new promise. Much later, when the camp was asleep, Ashki found her by the new, trickling flume. The sound of the water was a promise of life. He had one more thing to tell her. He needed her to know, before tomorrow, exactly who he was. "After the long walk," he said, his voice low. "After we came back, I was hungry. My people were hungry. A captain, a blue coat, like Pike. He offered me a job." Kate turned, listening. "He said I was smart. He said I knew the land. He wanted me to be a scout, to track. He said I would have a uniform, a full belly, respect." He looked into the darkness. "He wanted me to track the bands that would not come in, my own cousins, my uncles. He wanted me to trade my people for a hot meal, to sell my mother so I could eat at her table." He held up his scarred, wounded hand. "I told him no. I told him I would rather starve as a man than eat as his dog. This is what we are fighting. Kate, not just Pike. We are fighting that, the choice, to sell who you are, or to stay and be who you are, no matter the cost." Kate stepped forward and, for the first time, she initiated the touch. She took his wounded hand, the one Vex had bitten, and held it. "And now a schoolteacher from Missouri stands with you," she whispered. He looked at their joined hands. "If we live, when we build the stone school, it will need a teacher who knows the land, who knows how to listen to the water." "And the land," she said, her voice thick. "We'll need a teacher who knows how to write, who can put the truth onto paper and onto glass, so that no one, ever again, can say it did not happen." He met her gaze, his dark eyes holding hers. The promise from the cliff, and this new one, wove together, becoming one strong rope. "One home, Shash Yazi," he said, "with 2 ways to see, 2 ways to teach." It was a vow, a foundation laid in the ash, by a trickle of water, on the eve of the final battle. The railroad bridge was the only way across the deep arroyo. It was a monument to Silas Pike's ambition, a steel skeleton of progress that cast a long, sharp shadow over the valley. This was where he had chosen to hold his auction, to show the investors from the east the raw power he wielded. But Miguel's accident had delayed the investors, and Kate's evidence, delivered by a fast rider, had reached the ear of a man who was not in Pike's pocket, Judge Lang, a traveling federal magistrate known for his hard, swift, and unbuyable justice. So, it was not an auction. It was a hearing. Pike's men, led by Harlan Vex, controlled the bridge. They were jumpy, armed with repeating rifles, their arrogance soured by the capture of their leader and the burning of the valley. The air was thick with smoke, tension, and the smell of coal from the single and waiting steam engine on the track. Judge Lang arrived. He was a thin, bird-like man with a white beard and eyes as sharp as glass shards. He had no army, only a single clerk. He looked at the armed men, at the scorched valley, and at the two groups of people assembled on either side of the Arroyo Pike. His lawyer, Charlotte Hale, and his guards on one side. Kate, Ashki, Miguel, Bigay, and the entire, silent, watching population of the valley on the other. "This is an irregular court," Judge Lang announced, his voice a dry rasp that cut through the silence. "But these are irregular times. I will hear this matter now." The court was held on the dusty ground, 100 feet from the bridge, under the shadow of the steel trestle. Silas Pike, dressed in a fine Eastern suit, was composed and confident. He let his lawyer speak. "Your Honor," Charlotte Hale began, her voice smooth and reasonable. "This is a simple matter of commerce. My client, Mr. Pike, holds a legal, federally approved grant for this entire watershed, registry file 9426A. She produced the paper, the one with the forged signatures and Hobson's fake seal. He is bringing the railroad. He is bringing jobs. He is bringing progress to this territory. His actions fall squarely under the doctrine of public interest." "Public interest," Judge Lang repeated, his eyes unblinking. "You mean his interest?" Mr. Pike's diversion of the water was a necessary step to secure the resources for the new rail line, a line that will benefit every citizen of this territory. Hale pressed on, her voice rising with righteous energy. "Thank you, Counselor," Lang said, cutting her off. He turned his head. "Miss Whitaker, you are the one who filed this complaint. You are the one wearing the star. I assume you have more than just indignation." Kate stepped forward. She was not dressed as a lawyer. She was dressed in her scorched, stained dress, the tin star crooked on her chest, the blue woven band on her wrist. She carried her heavy wooden plate box. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady, "Mr. Pike does not have a land grant. He has a forgery." A gasp went up from the crowd. Pike's face, for the first time, tightened. "This," Kate said, "is a plate I took on the day of my arrival." She held up the glass image of the juniper tree. "It shows Mr. Pike's personal rail car, P&A 406, at the warehouse. On that day, his dynamite was already here." "Irrelevant," Hale snapped. "Mr. Pike is a freight magnate." "And this," Kate continued, holding up the second plate, the one of Vex in the pass, "is Harlan Vex, his employee, attacking my wagon. And in the background, by pure chance, is a reflection of the land office file number he was trying to steal, the same number on your grant, Miss Hale." Judge Lang leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "And this," Kate said, her voice low, holding up the third plate, the one from the flash, "is Mr. Pike's company seal on the crates of dynamite inside that warehouse." She stepped back, and Ashki stepped forward, emptying his cloth bag onto the judge's makeshift table, the cut cable, the detonator pin. "The tools from the warehouse," Ashki said, his voice flat. "The same ones used to blow the dam." Kate finished. "He did not just divert the water, Your Honor. He stole it. He did not just file a grant. He faked it, using a terrified clerk named Hobson. He did not come for the public interest. He came for his own, and he used fire and dynamite and terror to get it." Charlotte Hale was on her feet. "This is a circus, a collection of blurry photographs and savage accusations. She has no standing. This child has no authority." "No," a new voice said, a voice of pure, cold acid. "But I do." The crowd parted. Sheriff Alma Price walked forward. She was not in her riding clothes. She was in a clean uniform, her own badge polished and pinned firmly to her chest. And beside her were 2 United States Marshals, their faces hard, their hands resting on their holsters. "Alma," Kate breathed, a wave of relief so strong it made her dizzy. "Judge Lang," Price said, ignoring Kate. Her eyes locked on Pike. "Apologies for the interruption, but I have here a federal warrant for the arrest of Silas Pike, Harlan Vex, and one Clerk Hobson." "On what charge?" Pike roared, his face purple. "Conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder for a start," Price said calmly. "You see, Your Honor, it turns out Clerk Hobson, when faced with a federal marshal and a long prison term, found his conscience." She held up a sheaf of papers. "He has provided a full, signed confession, detailing every payment, every forgery, and every order he took directly from Mr. Pike." It was over. The chain of evidence was complete. The legal lie was broken. Harlan Vex knew it. He was not a man of law. He was an animal. He had been standing near the edge of the crowd, his hand on his pistol, and he saw not a courtroom, but a trap. "No!" he screamed, and the word was pure. Animal rage. He did not aim at Price. He did not aim at Kate. He aimed at the judge. He fired. The world exploded into chaos. Judge Lang's clerk screamed and fell. Vex fired again. The marshals returned fire. The crowd screamed and scattered. "Get Pike!" Vex yelled to his men. "To the engine!" Ashkey did not move toward Vex. His eyes were, as always, on the bigger picture. He had seen something no one else had. A bundle of dynamite, tied to a cable, hidden in the trestles above the judge's table. A final, desperate trap. Vex's shot had been the signal, but his men had not had time to trigger it. "Down!" Ashkey roared, shoving Kate toward the ground. He raised his rifle, not at a man, but at the cable. His shot, from a wounded shoulder, was perfect. The bullet snapped the rope. The bundle of dynamite, instead of falling on the court, swung away, crashing harmlessly against a steel beam. At the same moment, Kate saw the other threat. In the chaos, Vex's men, trying to create a diversion, had set the lone steam engine in motion. It was chugging forward, unmanned, its brake unsecured, gathering speed. It was aimed straight for the end of the track, where the crowd of dine and settler families, including the children, were cowering. Kate did not think. She ran. She ran past the gunfire, past the screaming men, to the side of the track. She saw the heavy iron track brake lever. It was meant to be thrown by two men. She grabbed it, her hands raw, her entire body straining. She threw her weight, her fear, her rage, her hope into it. The iron shrieked as it moved, as the points on the track shifted, diverting the massive engine onto a dead-end siding, saving the crowd. She collapsed over the lever, gasping, as the engine crashed into a mound of earth, hissing to a stop. Silas Pike was running. His finery was covered in dust, his face a mask of terror. He had seen it all collapse. He scrambled, alone, onto the footplate of a small yard engine, a shunter, and fumbled with the controls. "He is getting away!" Sheriff Price yelled. But he was not. Miguel Ortega had been watching from a distance, his horse ready. He was not a lawman. He was not a warrior. He was a traitor, and he knew how to stop a runaway horse or a runaway man. He spurred his horse, riding not at Pike, but alongside the track. As Pike's small engine began to move, Miguel rode up, and with a grunt of perfect, desperate timing, he threw a heavy cast-iron chock, a metal block used to hold wagon wheels, directly into the path of the engine's main drive wheel. The iron met iron. The drive wheel, instead of climbing the track, climbed the chock. The engine buckled, tipped, and ground to a halt at a sickening, tilted angle, derailed and useless. Silas Pike, the visionary, the magnate, was trapped. The silence that fell was more profound than the noise. The gunfire had stopped. Vex was on the ground, wounded and held at gunpoint by a marshal. Pike was climbing down from his tilted engine, his hands raised, his suit torn. And then The sound of walking. From the rocks, from the valley floor, from both sides of the arroyo. The people came, led by Bigay, the settlers and the Dena, the women and the old men. They walked. They did not carry weapons. They did not shout. They simply came, forming a vast, silent, unmovable circle around the bridge, around the judge, around the captured men. They were not there for revenge. They were there to be seen, to be witnesses. Bigay walked forward and stood before Judge Lang. "We are the valley," she said, her voice clear. "We ask for justice. We ask for the water to be returned." Judge Lang looked at the confession in his hand. He looked at the federal marshals. He looked at the chain of glass plates. And he looked at the hundreds of silent, watching faces. He was a man of the law, and he saw that the law, for once, was perfectly aligned with the justice. He stood. "This court," he said, his voice carrying in the new silence, "finds that the land grant 9426A is a product of fraud and conspiracy. It is null and void. A single collective breath. I hereby order the immediate arrest of Silas Pike and Harlan Vex to be transported to Santa Fe for federal trial." The marshals pulled Pike and Vex to their feet. "I further order," the judge continued, his voice like iron, "that the SP Mining Company will, at its own expense, restore the original flow of water to this valley, and it will pay, in full, for the damages to the fields, and for the construction of a new community-held school, well and stable, as outlined by Sheriff Whitaker." He gave Kate a small, sharp nod. "And," he finished, looking at Clerk Hobson, who was weeping in his wagon, "I sentence you to 5 years of hard labor to be served building that new school." It was over. Kate, shaking, exhausted, and yet feeling a profound, clean peace, found she had one more thing to do. She had one plate left. She unstrapped her camera. She set it up, her hands, for the first time, not shaking. She looked through the lens. She saw them all. Sheriff Price, her hand on a captive pike. Miguel, tipping his hat to a laughing settler. Ashki, his rifle resting on his good shoulder, standing beside a proud, straight Bigay. The settlers, the dine, no longer two groups, but one, standing together, squinting in the sunlight, on the bridge that had been a battlefield and was now a stage. She uncovered the lens. "Hold still," she said, her voice full of a joy that was almost painful. She captured the image, the final piece of evidence, not of a crime, but of a victory. The dust of the showdown did not settle quickly. It was replaced by the sound of hammers. The first task was the water. Judge Lang had been as good as his word, and the marshals had enforced it. Before Silas Pike was put on the train to Santa Fe, a crew, paid for by his seized assets, was sent to the canyon. They did not just remove the dynamite, they were forced to dismantle the new channel, stone by stone. But the settlers and the dine did not wait for the law. Led by Ashki, his arm still in a sling, they went to the high reservoir. They worked together, hauling rock, mixing mud and straw, their hands and backs rebuilding the natural dam that Pike had destroyed. It was slow, hard work. It took a week. When the last stone was set, a silence fell. They watched. The water, which had been gushing toward the mine, now slowed, eddied, and began to rise, pooling behind the repaired wall. A few hours later, a trickle of water, then a stream, found the old, true path. It spilled over the rocks and flowed down, back into the dry creek bed of the valley. It was not a roar, it was a whisper, but it was the sound of life returning. The children, who had been watching from the rocks, let out a cheer that echoed down the canyon. Down in the valley, the next crew was already at work. The community well was deepened, not with shovels, but with proper drilling equipment, paid for by Pike's fine. They drilled past the shallow table, past the rock, down to the deep, clean, reliable aquifer that Pike had coveted. When the water rose in the new well, it was cold, sweet, and constant. While the men worked on the water, the women and children worked on the school. Clerk Hobson, his face a mask of misery, found himself mixing mud and straw, his soft, ink-stained hands raw and bleeding. Kate supervised, not as a warden but as a teacher. The children, whom she had taught to write their names, now helped her build. The new schoolhouse, built on the site of the burned warehouse, was made of stone from the arroyo and thick adobe. It was round, like a kiva, with a solid juniper beam roof and deep, cool windows. Sheriff Alma Price returned to her office, her badge polished, her authority absolute. Her first act was not one of revenge, but of change. She rode to Big A's Hogan. She did not bring a warrant. She brought an offer. The next day, a young Dine woman, the same one who had helped Natani recover, stood beside Price. Her name was Shadiji, and she wore a badge pinned to her traditional velvet blouse. She was the new deputy sheriff. She knew the land. She knew the people. And she was afraid of no one. The balance of power in the valley had shifted, not just from one man, but from one world to another. Miguel Ortega, his wagon repaired, also started a new project. He dismantled his old trading post, the one built on quick profits, and in its place, he opened the Valley Exchange. It was a cooperative. He was not a boss, he was a partner. The Dine brought their wool and corn. The settlers brought their beans and ironwork. He traded it all, and the profits were divided, with a full 10% going into a new, permanent fund for the school. He even had a shelf for a lending library, starting with Kate's few remaining primers. The engines of justice, once started, moved quickly. Silas Pike was transported to Santa Fe, his trial a formality given Hobson's testimony and the federal warrants. He was found guilty. His assets were seized, and he disappeared into the federal prison system, a man of vision reduced to a number in a cell. The day before she left, Charlotte Hale sent a note to Kate. It was delivered by a small boy, and the lawyer herself was nowhere to be seen. Kate opened it, expecting a final, legal threat. It was not. The handwriting was perfect, but the words were simple. Miss Whitaker, it read. I am a student of the law. The law is a structure, and I have always believed in its strength. I have never seen it moved by such unconventional means. You did not just present evidence. You presented a truth that I, in my education, had overlooked. You have cost my client his freedom, and you have cost me my position. Strangely, I find I am in your debt. Do not stop teaching. Your student, C. Hale. There was no signature, only the initials. Kate folded the letter, a strange, sad respect for the woman who had been her enemy. The valley began to heal. The cornfields were replanted, watered by the new, deep well. The charred circle from the wildfire, now watered by the returned creek, began to show the first faint whispers of new green grass. One evening, as the sun was setting, turning the red rocks to fire, Ashki came to Kate. She was not in the new schoolhouse. She was at her tent, packing the last of her things. He stood, watching her. He was not wearing his sling. His shoulder had healed, the muscles moving smoothly under his skin. His hand, too, was healed. A pale, jagged scar, the only reminder of Vex's bite. You are leaving, he asked. His voice was calm. No, Kate said, smiling. I am moving. Into the small room behind the new school. It is finished. He nodded. He had known this. He held out his hand. In it were two objects. The first was a simple, thin necklace of stitched leather, with a single, polished blue stone, the color of the strip Bigay had given her. The second was a small, tin-type photograph. She took the photograph first. It was one she had not taken. It was small, blurred, and had been done by a cheap studio in Santa Fe. It was a picture of him, taken years before, for a government census. He was younger, his face thinner, his eyes holding a haunted, angry look. It was the look of the long walk. "This," he said, touching the picture, "was the man the one who hated." Then he held up the necklace. "This," he said, "is the stone of the sky, the stone of the water. It is for the woman I see now." Kate's hands trembled. This was not a proposal. It was not a grand, white man's declaration. It was a dying promise, a statement of fact. "You are, I am, we are." She took off the small silver locket she had worn, the one that had belonged to her mother. She put the leather strip over her head. The stone was cool against her skin. In return, she held out her hand. In it was not a necklace. It was a photograph, the last one she had taken, the one of the community, victorious on the bridge. "This," she said, her voice thick, "is the picture of the man you are, the one who leads, the one who sees." She had mounted it on a piece of clean, polished pine. "It is for our home, the one we will build." He took it. He did not smile. He just looked at her, his eyes holding a depth of love and respect that was more powerful than any passion. It was a promise. It was a foundation. It was enough. That week, Kate wrote an article. She did not use her name. She did not use ashkeys. She signed it simply, "A Teacher." She wrote about the valley, about the water, about the fraud. She did not write it as an accusation, but as a lesson. She wrote about how paper could be made to lie, but how the land, and the water, always told the truth. She wrote about a community, not of one people, but of all people, who had chosen to listen to that truth. She sent it with Miguel to the newspaper in Santa Fe. A few days later, she was sitting with Bigay, watching the old woman weave. The new schoolhouse was bustling with the sounds of children. Bigay was smiling, her eyes on the high ridge. "What is it?" Grandmother Kate asked. "The juniper," Bigay said, her shuttle moving back and forth. "The one you love, the bent tree. The storm bent it, the fire scorched it." She looked at Kate, her smile deep and knowing. "But the roots held, and the tree stands stronger after the storm." The sheep, which had been moved to the high country, were returning, their bells a soft, chiming music. As the red sun slipped behind the canyon wall, the first stars appeared, and from the rocks above, clear and thin and full of hope, came the sound of a single flute, playing a song of renewal. A year passed. The seasons in the high desert were sharp and clear. The raw, scarred valley of 1877 had given way to the settled, healing valley of 1878. The new schoolhouse, the one built of stone and adobe, was known as the Wind School. Kate had designed it with deep windows and a wide, covered porch, so that, even on the hottest days, a breeze moved through the rooms. Its roof was solid juniper, and it smelled of clay, wood, and chalk. Outside its door, the new community, well, dug deep into the earth, provided water for everyone. The squeak of its handle and the rhythmic splash of water filling a bucket was the new heartbeat of the settlement. Next to it, a communal kitchen had been built, a place where dine women and settler women baked bread together in a large stone oven, sharing recipes and gossip, their languages mixing. Inside the school, Kate Whitaker, or rather, Kate Nez, as she was now known, though she still signed her letters, C. Whitaker, had hung her photographs. It was a series she called Water, Land, People. The first was the bent juniper, standing against the wind. The last was the picture from the bridge, a crowd of faces, dine and settler, united in victory. And in between were the new portraits Natani, the young warrior who had recovered, now standing tall, Bigay, her hands at her loom, a small smile on her face, Sheriff Price and her deputy, Shadiji, side by side, a picture of the new law. The children in her classroom, a mix of pale, freckled faces and brown, dark-eyed ones. now spoke 2 languages. They could read "See Spot Run" from the primers, and they could also point to the high mesa and say "Dzil," the word for mountain. They learned their letters, and they learned to identify the shapes of the clouds. Ashki Nez had also become a teacher. He was no longer just a guardian. He was a leader. He had a permanent water patrol, a group of young Dine and settler men. He taught them, not how to fight, but how to see. He taught them how to read the sky for the promise of rain, how to find water by the type of plants that grew, how to track a stray sheep or a lost calf. And he taught them the new law, the one that had been born of the conflict. We are the guardians of the water, he told them, his voice calm and strong. We do not own it. We protect it. We do not shoot first. We do not shoot at all, if we can speak, but we never, ever let anyone turn it from the valley. The law had been made ironclad. Sheriff Alma Price, with the backing of Judge Lang and the authority of the federal marshals, had drawn up a new kind of charter for the valley. It was a simple document, but it was revolutionary. It stated that the water rights for the canyon were held in common, in trust for the whole community. They could not be sold, they could not be diverted, and they could not be appropriated for private gain. Miguel Ortega was the first to sign it. As the head of the Valley Exchange, he also added a new clause to his own trading charter, a fair trade agreement that guaranteed a set, honest price for wool and corn, ensuring that no one, settler or Dine, would ever be so poor that they could be bought by a man like Pike. The valley was safe. It was beginning to prosper. Kate and Ashki had plans. Their home was not one place. It was the small room behind the school, and it was his family's Hogan by the spring. They were 2, and they were 1. One evening, they were sitting on the porch of the Wind School, watching the children play. They are coming from the east now, Kate said, her voice thoughtful. The new settlers. They passed through, on their way to California. They are tired. They are hungry. Ashki nodded, watching the dust of a distant wagon on the horizon. They need a place to rest, a safe one. They need a way station, Kate said, the idea forming as she spoke. A place to get water, and news. She looked at the shelf of books inside the school. And maybe a library, a small one. Ashki looked at her, a slow smile touching his face. He understood. A way station, a library, we trade. We trade, she agreed, her eyes bright. They can have water and a safe place to camp. They can borrow a book for the journey. And in return, Ashki finished. They leave a bag of salt, or nails, or a new book for the shelf. It was a plan for the future, a plan built not on profit, but on sharing. That night, they lay in the small room. The window was open, and the wind, the same wind that had once carried only dust and fear, now moved through the room, carrying the scent of the new, green cornfields and the faint, sweet smell of rain. The valley had healed. The creek, full and steady, ran its true course. There was no passion in the way the storybooks wrote it. There was no desperate, breathless claiming. Their love was not a fire, it was a foundation. It was the quiet, profound choice they made every single day. He was sitting, his back against the adobe wall, the blue stone she had given him resting against his dark skin. She was next to him, her head resting on his good shoulder, her hand, no longer blistered, holding his, the jagged white scar from Vex's bite a permanent part of him. She asked me today, Kate whispered into the darkness. Zan, the little girl who was taken. What did she ask? Shash Yazay, he murmured, his voice heavy with sleep. She asked if we would have children. Ashki was silent for a long time. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart. And what did the teacher say? The teacher said that she hoped so. Kate whispered. She said she wanted a boy with his father's eyes, who could see the truth in the land, and a girl with her mother's heart, who could write it down for everyone to read. Ashki turned, his hand coming up to touch her hair. He did not say, "I love you." The words were too small, too white. He said, "We are here. This is our home. The children will come, and they will be safe. I have chosen. I have chosen," she whispered back. On the ridge, high above, the bent juniper tree, its roots dug deep, stood guard. It looked down on a valley that was no longer red and gray, but green. The wind moved through its branches, carrying the taste of new, fresh rain. We chose to stay and build amidst the wind, the laughter of children, and the sound of water that could not lie. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am curious, where in the world are you listening from? Let me know in the comments. It is always a pleasure to see where the tales travel. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to the channel, Wild West Tales, and giving this video a like. And if you really loved it, hit that hype button. It helps more than you know, and it ensures these stories get to be heard by more folks. Thank you again.